Do you know Box Girl? The girl was given some kind of drug to make her body soft, and then put into a small box. After offering sacrifices in the Een cave for a month, the Box Girl will be created. My grandmother said, whatever the Box Girl asks for she gets. But she didn't know the second half of the sentence. What you ask for you get. If you have the life you get it, but if you don't you won't enjoy it. My name is Emma, I am the third child in my family. I have two older sisters, Ava and Mia. A few days ago my mother gave birth to another sister. My father and my grandmother beat her up together because daughters in the village were the least valuable and were money-losing goods. My mother gave birth to 4 daughters in a row, becoming a laughing stock in the village. My father hung his head all day long, drinking and beating my sisters to vent his anger. We do all the dirty and tiring work at home. When it was time to eat, we sisters were never allowed to sit at the table. We could only sit in the corner with our broken bowls and eat their leftovers. There was plenty left so I could still eat half full. If there is not much left, all you can do is drink a few more bowls of cold water to fill your stomach. However, no matter how careful you are, you still can't escape the tragic fate. My eldest sister was sold to an old bachelor in the village by my grandmother for 10,000 yuan. Within 3 years she was beaten to death by the old bachelor. I still remember when I went to collect my eldest sister's body, the whole room was filled with blood. My eldest sister was naked, her face was bloody. Not only did my parents not seek justice for her, they also just grabbed a torn quilt and wrapped her up in it, then dug a hole in the ground and buried her. My pacifier kept muttering, "What bad luck. It really is a money loser." She also promised the old bachelor that she would sell my second sister to him when she grew up, but this time she couldn't pay 10,000 yuan, she had to pay more. Finally, in front of my eldest sister's corpse, they bargained down to 15,000 yuan. Seeing my second sister growing up day by day, my grandmother looked at her with brighter eyes. One night, my second sister disappeared. The villagers searched for a whole day but couldn't find it, so the grandparents went home cursing. Actually, I was quite happy because I knew she had escaped from the village. A few days ago, my second sister secretly told me that the peddler who always came to the village to sell things promised to take her out of the village in the next few days. When she has a good life outside, she will come back to pick me up. After my second sister disappeared, the burden of the family suddenly fell on my shoulders. But I didn't dare to complain because I was afraid that my grandmother would sell me to an old bachelor. After all, I was only 1 year younger than my second sister. A month passed like this. On the 7th day of July, my father and grandfather brought back a big red box from outside. As soon as I entered the hospital, my grandmother came up to me and asked nervously, "Is it done?" My dad stamped his feet excitedly and said, "It's done." Then he couldn't wait to open the box. My mom also rushed over holding my newborn fourth sister. Several people walked around the box and exclaimed, "Tisk tisk," as if there was some treasure inside. Driven by curiosity, I also went over. When I saw what was in the box, I almost fainted. It was a man wearing a ghost face mask. The whole person curled up in the small box, motionless. But he was not dead, and a pair of eyes were still moving inside the gloomy mask. Tears kept flowing from my eyes. I can't imagine how a living person can be put into a box and what kind of pain he must endure. My grandma said that it was called a box girl and she could guarantee the birth of a son. She also warned me not to tell anyone or she would pull out my tongue. They lifted the box girl out of the box, placed her in the corner and covered her with a piece of cloth. In the first few days they didn't give the box girl anything to eat. No one was allowed to get close. If I got a little closer while cleaning, my grandma would beat and scold me. The strange thing is that although the box girl didn't eat anything, she didn't starve to death. On the 7th day, my grandmother took a bowl of meat paste and fed it to the girl 1 spoonful at a time. My grandfather sat beside me and asked, "Is this method really reliable?" My grandma was very happy. "Reliable? That master is really smart. Just drink a cup of women's tears every day for 7 days, and you will definitely have a grandson. My grandfather rubbed his hands happily. Let my grandma quickly collect some tears and send them to my mom. The strange thing is, from that day on, I never heard my fourth sister cry again. 7 days later, my mother was pregnant. My mother's belly seemed to have swelled up overnight, and it looked even bigger than when she was 3 months pregnant. My grandparents were so happy that they quickly cooked a pot of bone soup for my mother alone. I smelled the aroma of the meat and licked my dry lips. But I was confused. My family has never bought spare ribs, so where did the bones come from? My father didn't let me ask more questions and warned me sternly not to tell anyone about it. The Alexander family was pregnant with a son spread throughout the village within a short period of time. A group of onlookers came to my house. My mother proudly opened her belly and showed it to the group of wives and mothers. This baby must be a boy. The widow in the village was always a troublemaker. She said sarcastically, "You have given birth to 4 daughters, so this one must be a daughter too." My mother was not angry, she just smiled mysteriously. "This time it must be a son, my family has a magic weapon." A group of people laughed and said that my mother missed her son so much that she went crazy. However, for months later, my mother went to the hospital for an ultrasound and it turned out to be a son. Since then, people have often come to my house under the pretext of visiting. They ask my mother questions and want to know what the secret to having a son is. In the end, no one was able to get it out. Later, one day my dad got drunk and brought a drinking buddy home and showed him the box girl. The drinking buddy ran away screaming and howling, and the next day the whole village knew about it. The village chief and his men came to the door and said, "Matthew said there is a monster hiding in your house. Is that true?" Matthew ran away. My dad sobered up from the alcohol and quickly went to my grandparents for advice. My grandma told him not to worry, that nothing would happen, and that our family might become rich. After the village chief finished asking questions, my grandmother smiled mysteriously and led everyone to the corner. She opened the lid of the box, and the woman in the box was completely exposed to everyone. Everyone gasped. The village chief was very calm. "Is this the box girl?" My grandma looked at him in surprise and said, "That's right." The village chief rolled his eyes and said seriously, "Your family is breaking the law and you must go to jail." My grandmother raised her eyebrows and said, "This is my Mia, my own daughter. You can do whatever you want to her." "What kind of law is this? Second sister?" My grandma said, "The box girl is my second sister." My eyes went dark and tears immediately flowed down. I thought my second sister had escaped, but it turned out that she was turned into a box girl. "Mia, you are wrong. You committed intentional injury and must be sentenced. This is my own child, he is too cruel. Just a while ago he said his child was missing and the thief cried thief." The villagers all criticized my grandma one after another. My grandmother looked like a dead pig that was not afraid of boiling water, and said disdainfully, "You don't have to pretend to be righteous in front of me. Let me tell you, this is the magic weapon for giving birth to a son in my family. When the time comes, whether a family wants to have a son will depend on my mood." Everyone's expression suddenly changed and they stopped talking. The widow asked cautiously, "Sister-in-law, is this really a guarantee of giving birth to a son?" My grandma gave her a look and said, "Why don't you try it with your old lover first? 500 each time, I guarantee you'll give birth to a pearl." Everyone burst into laughter. The widow blushed and walked away in disgrace. "If you don't give birth to a son, will you return the money?" My grandmother patted her chest and said, "Refund." Inheritance is a big deal for the village, so the village chief didn't say anything and tacitly agreed to it. 2 families in the village really went back to get the money and paid the deposit that night. That night, my grandmother excitedly circled around the box girl, "No, it should be my second sister," all night long. He kept muttering gold nugget in his mouth. The next morning, my grandma was in a good mood and for the first time ever, she let me sit at the table for dinner. That was my first time eating at the table. My mother peeled an egg for me herself. She stroked my arm with a complicated look on her face. "It may hurt a little later, just bear with it." After saying that, she stuffed another egg into my hand. Before I could react, my dad took out a hemp rope and tied me up. My grandma then handed him a boning knife. I was scared and cried out in terror, "Mom and Dad, please don't kill me. I'll obey you. I can eat once every 3 days and I can do any job. When I grow up and make money, I will give it to you. Please let me go." My grandmother looked at me sinisterly and said, "Shut up, you little girl. If you scream again, I'll pull your tongue out." After saying that, she slapped my mother in the face. "Don't do it yet." My mother covered her face, glared at me, then deftly pulled my arm out and held it tightly. I pleaded with a trembling voice, "Mom, I'm scared." My mother looked at me with a complicated expression. "Bear with it." After saying that, she gave my dad a look. My father raised his knife and cut off a piece of meat from my arm. I screamed loudly. The pain made my whole body convulse and I cried desperately. My grandma took a rag and stuffed it into my mouth. "My daughter is gone, why are you crying? You are mourning? If you were not even that useful, I would have sold you out long ago." After the flesh was removed, my mother untied the rope. The rough hemp rope rubbed against the wound and I shivered in pain. I looked at her with tears in my eyes and wanted to say to her, "Mom, it hurts." A hint of pity flashed across her eyes, but she didn't take the rag out of my mouth. Instead, she nodded to my dad. My dad immediately held me down and said in a deep voice, "Pour more, don't let it get infected. You have to have the surgery tomorrow." What to pour? I was scared and struggled hard. My mother came up and kicked me in the face. "Little bitch. Be quiet or I'll skin you alive." She glared at my mother and said, "Pour it out quickly." This time my mother didn't hesitate anymore. She indifferently took out a bottle of white wine and poured it on my wound. "Ah, it hurts. It hurts so much." I kept screaming, twisting your body desperately. My grandma kicked me twice again, seeing that I was still struggling. She cursed me viciously and hit me on the head with a stool. The intense pain made my eyes go black and I passed out. Before I passed out, I heard my dad complain, "Mom, you're too harsh. Don't beat him to death, he still has to go to the fields tomorrow." When I woke up again, my arm was numb, the wound was exposed to the air, and the wine burned my neck. My mother sat aside. I thought she felt sorry for me and wanted to come and see me. But when she saw me awake, she just said coldly, "Hurry up and drink this bowl of brown sugar water. We still have to continue the cutting tomorrow. Don't die. Don't die." I chewed on these words. I hate it. My tears flowed down my cheeks and into my mouth. It is bitter. Emma, don't blame me for being cruel. Blame it on your bad luck for being reborn as a daughter. We are mother and daughter, don't say I am heartless. When I give birth to a son, I will ask your grandma to marry you off. It's better to marry an old bachelor than now. Without waiting for my response, she lifted my head roughly and poured sugar water into my mouth. Sugar water is sweet, but why does it taste so bitter in my mouth? One of the two families who paid the deposit was Matthew's family, who was scared away by my second sister. Matthew is in his 40s and has had 3 wives. He still has no son or child. The villagers secretly laugh at him as a sterilizer. But he was a local scoundrel who did everything from drinking, gambling, and fighting to drinking and whoring. No one in the village dared to offend him, so they only dared to gossip about him behind his back. Originally, my grandmother wanted to personally go to his wife's house to deliver the medicine lead, but Matthew said he wanted to watch it personally, for fear that his wife might drink something bad. Then almost everyone in the village came. They surrounded my small courtyard in 3 layers. In fact, they just wanted to see how this woman in the box appeared. The first day they were confused by this matter, but now they are confused. After all, every family has a daughter, and this good way to make money may also be useful to their own family. My father was a little hesitant when he saw so many people. My grandma was very open and she pushed my mom and asked her to get me out quickly. As soon as I walked out of the woodshed, I saw so many people and I was so scared that I went back inside. My mother grabbed me and pulled me out. I held on to the door frame tightly and the woodshed creaked. I ran over, grabbed my hair from behind, and threw me to the ground. Then he turned over and sat on me, punching me in the face. "Little bitch. You dare to run?" I screamed desperately, but no one came to save me. Some were just watching the fun, while others were just standing by and watching. My grandma was tired of beating me, so I asked my dad to drag me up. Then they tied me up with hemp rope in front of the main hall so that everyone in the village could see me. I knew what was going to happen next, and I looked at the crowd in horror. "Save me, save me." However, the villagers were watching with great interest, wondering what would happen next. No one paid any attention to me, and some even urged my father to hurry up and not waste time. "Okay." My dad took out the boning knife again. Together with my mother, she cut a piece of meat from my other arm. I wailed loudly but was drowned out by the noise of the crowd. "This Alexander is quite skillful." "Yes. Look how neat the wound is." "Don't mention it, his Emma hair is quite white and tender. It would be a pity to cut off the flesh, hee." No one cares about me. Because I am a money loser, and when I die they will just dig a hole and bury me. My grandmother proudly took the piece of meat and showed it to everyone. "Do you have so many daughters in your family? I'm telling you guys, don't try to steal my business. It has to be your own flesh and blood. And it has to be a virgin." Everyone looked embarrassed and started laughing. "Sister-in-law, what are you talking about? We are just curious and want to see the fun." My grandma snorted and asked my mother to take the piece of meat into the kitchen. As for me, I seemed to be forgotten, tied up with ropes and thrown on the ground. Everyone craned their necks to see what my mother was doing with the piece of meat. My grandmother smiled mysteriously. After a while, the smell of meat wafted through the room. Half an hour later, my mother came out with a bowl of meat paste. My grandmother asked my father to move the box out, find a table and put it on it. Then she lifted the cloth covering it. Although everyone had seen this before, they still gasped. Someone whispered, "The Alexander family is really cruel." My grandmother heard this and said with a smile on her face, "You say I'm cruel, fine, but I won't accept your money." The man quickly apologized to my grandma and promised to add 200 yuan. My grandma looked very proud. It was the first time she felt so proud. Then she asked my mother to feed the box girl with the meat paste spoonful by spoonful. After she finished eating, she filled a cup with tears for Matthew's wife to drink on the spot. 7 days later, Matthew's wife became pregnant. At first, everyone was a little hesitant, but now they all believed it. They all made appointments with my grandma. My milk price has also gone up. There's only so much meat on Emma's body. If we cut too much and if she dies one day, it's not my fault if I can't get a spot. First come, first served. The price was raised to 2,000 yuan. That didn't stop people's enthusiasm. Many people still came to ask for money. My grandmother received so much money that her hands were soft and she counted the money happily every day. Because there are so many people asking for help, and they can't cut off all the flesh on my body. After all, I am still the main labor force in the family. My grandmother started taking one every 2 weeks. However, the good times did not last long. The box girl stopped crying. At first, my grandmother thought my second sister was dehydrated and tried her best to give her water. But no matter how much she drank, she just stopped crying. Later, she tried many other methods, but none of them worked. My second sister just stared at them with her eyes wide open, without any reaction. Finally, the village chief heard about it and came over to visit my second sister. Then he leaned over and whispered something in my grandmother's ear. My grandmother pulled my mother over and started slapping her in front of my second sister. Each beating was more severe than the last. My mother's face was red and swollen. She kept crying and begging for mercy. However, my second sister still had no expression on her face. My grandma was tired of beating my mother and threw her aside. My mother sat on the ground, sobbing and staring at my second sister with resentment. Suddenly she looked at me, wiped her tears and crawled to my feet. "Mom, Mia loves Emma the most." My grandma's eyes lit up and she became more energetic. She asked my dad to put my second sister in front of me. Then the knife gradually approached me. My second sister cried. Her tears flowed freely. My mother stared at my second sister and she shouted excitedly, "It's done. It's done. Mia is crying." Afterwards, she angrily scolded my second sister. "You treacherous little bitch. You didn't cry when I beat your mother, you deserve to die." She couldn't touch my second sister, so she came up to strangle me. There was not a single piece of good flesh on my body, so she tore the wound with her hands. From that day on, as long as my second sister didn't cry, they would torture me. At this time, a person appeared in front of me. "Do you still remember the peddler who promised to take my second sister away? One night, he sneaked into my house and said to me, 'Don't be afraid, I will come to save you two sisters.' I didn't take your sister away at the beginning, so I will definitely save you this time." He also peeled a very sweet candy for me, and I suddenly felt that life seemed to have hope again. The next day the peddler brought a man to the door. The man was gentle and elegant, with his snow-white shirt rolled up to his elbows and a clean and bright smile. He said his aunt had been childless for many years and he heard that there was a secret recipe for having a child in the village, so he was willing to pay a high price. But there was one request, that the box girl and I must be taken away. We are the golden nuggets of the family, how could my grandparents agree to this? But the man said he would only lend it to us for 1 month and was willing to pay 200,000 yuan. When my grandma heard the price of 200,000, her eyes lit up. Anyway, my mother is already pregnant with a son. After careful consideration, she agreed. The man paid the 200,000 yuan on the spot and left with my second sister and me. On the way, I heard the peddler call the man Mr. Luke. Luke ordered his men to put my second sister in a transparent glass jar. I was afraid that my second sister would be suffocated, so I tried my best to stop him, but he had so many men that I couldn't get close to him. So, I opened my mouth angrily and bit Mr. Luke's hand next to me. I was determined not to let go, and he just looked at me quietly. He pulled his bloody hand out until I calmed down and explained to me, "Girl, that glass tank is sterile and has oxygen in it." After I confirmed it, I lowered my head in embarrassment. I apologized to him shyly with a red face. He just smiled and ruffled my hair. "Girl, no one can bully you anymore." I smelled a faint scent on him like sunshine. Luke found a family doctor to treat my injuries and gave me the best medicine. I also had my own room and I was well fed and warmly dressed, and Mr. Luke cared for me every day. I feel I have never been so happy. I visit my second sister every day. The room my second sister was in was bigger than mine, and there were many sophisticated instruments around it that I didn't recognize. Luke said that he wanted to check my second sister's health in time to prevent her organ necrosis. I was very touched and kept asking him what he wanted and what I could give him in return. He always smiled gently and said that he didn't need anything in return, as long as he took good care of his health. Later, the flesh on my body gradually grew back. Although it was still bumpy, I was still very happy. Luke was also very happy. He often took me out to play and bought me all kinds of beautiful dresses. I gradually became more and more dependent on him and more inseparable from him. If he's not around for a day, I'll feel anxious and upset. I think I fell in love with him and my heart was completely focused on him. I visit my second sister less and less. Later, when I wanted to visit, Mr. Luke said that my second sister had fallen into a deep sleep and could not be disturbed easily. In the days without my second sister, my heart and eyes were full of Mr. Luke. But not long after, he disappeared. It was half a month later that I saw Mr. Luke again. He lay weakly on the bed, with tubes all over his body. I buried my face in his palms, tears streaming down my face. "Girl, don't cry, it will hurt me." I cried even harder. But he smiled. She smiled so beautifully. I was reflected in her sparkling eyes. At this moment, I swore that I would do anything to save him. "When you turn 18, we will get married." He gently stroked my head and said softly, 18 is the best childbearing age. We can have many babies by then." I nodded and smiled happily, and began to look forward to turning 18. until I met another girl. The girl was wearing a beautiful gauze dress and had delicate makeup on. She was holding Mr. Luke's arm and smiling intimately. I watched from a distance. I should have stepped forward to question him, but instead I hid him by mistake. I saw Mr. Luke smiling fondly at the girl and pinching her nose affectionately. That feeling is completely different to me. I felt sour in my heart, feeling like something had been taken away from me, although I originally had nothing. So I ran away cowardly. I even forgot to take my second sister with me. As I walked down the street, I suddenly didn't know where I could go. I sat under the bridge and cried silently. As night fell, I began to be afraid again and regretted my impulse. But I don't know how to go back. Suddenly, I heard the voice of Luke's housekeeper. The voices come from far to near. "You bunch of rubbish. How could you let that daughter run away? She is the key to the medicine. If we lose her, we will all die. Go find it now." Medicine let? Are you talking about me? I stared at the water without moving. Looking at the ripples, I smiled slowly. I walked out of the bridge tunnel slowly, deliberately letting Luke's family find me, and followed them back. As soon as I entered the living room, a piece of porcelain broke at my feet. Luke was originally angry, but when he saw me, he immediately became anxious and rushed over to hug me tightly. "Girl, where have you been? I thought you were lost." I lowered my head and said nothing. He stared at me closely. "Why are you leaving?" I raised my red and swollen eyes, tears streaming down my face in an instant. "I saw you shopping with another woman, and I felt bad." Luke raised his lips slightly and then lowered them immediately. He comforted me gently. "Silly girl, she is my sister, don't be jealous anymore." I lowered my head as if embarrassed, pretending not to see the cruelty that flashed across his eyes, and said that I would never misunderstand him again. He said that after I ran away from home this time, he felt a sense of crisis, so he decided to move up the wedding date. She wanted to marry me soon, not wait until I turned 18. I readily agreed. There was only one condition: the wedding should be held after 9 p.m. I had been waiting obediently to be the bride. Luke was visible to the naked eye. My good behavior made them relax their vigilance. On the day of the wedding, I quietly sneaked into the room where my second sister was kept. As soon as I entered the room, my second sister, who had been sleeping, opened her eyes. I held my second sister in front of me and slowly pushed open the main door of the wedding hall. Originally, when the wedding started, I was supposed to walk onto the stage from here with Mr. Luke. "Good evening, ladies and gentlemen." Everyone looked at me. I smiled. "Great, everyone is here. I have waited patiently for these few months." Luke was wearing a neat suit and looked at me with a frown. Then he forced himself to relax and said, "Why are you carrying my second sister?" I just smiled and said nothing. Suddenly the lights flickered, and the originally bright hall was plunged into darkness in an instant. Who turned off the lights? Someone checked the switch. At this moment, a baby cried out, and then one after another. It seemed as if countless babies were crawling from all directions. "What's that noise?" There was chaos in the hall. Then waves of screams rang out one after another. Finally, they could no longer be heard. "Second sister, you have worked hard." I curled the corners of my mouth. Luke's family, including the wedding guests, a total of 116 people, all died. I endured for more than 6 months and finally caught all these beasts in one fell swoop. From the first moment I saw Mr. Luke, I knew he was a more vicious person than my grandmother because he had a huge grudge. Ever since my second sister ate my flesh, we have developed a kind of telepathy. I can sense her thoughts. She said that Mr. Luke had a strong smell of blood and was followed by a group of infant spirits. This was his sin. Arriving at Luke's house, I watched him act coldly, wanting to know his purpose. At the same time, I was secretly investigating him. From all the information I pieced together, I discovered that his business was actually black market surrogacy. They used illegal means to abduct a group of young girls, many of whom were college students. Then they are used as surrogate mothers and they are constantly made pregnant and give birth. If the baby is a girl, it is aborted, and if it is a boy, it is sold to employers at a high price. This is also the reason why there are many infant spirits following Mr. Luke. And when those women can no longer bear children, their organs will be removed and sold at a high price. The appearance of our sisters also happened to open up new ideas for his business. But I am only one person and my flesh is limited. His business needs to be long-term, not a one-time thing. So, he decided to let me have a baby. My baby would be a new medicine and he could cut off the flesh and feed it to my second sister. As long as I keep giving birth and even in the future, the box woman will have an endless supply of blood and tears, and those pregnant women will keep giving birth to sons. My father's choice was naturally him. Only in this way could he firmly control the business. He wanted me to be obsessed with him, fall in love with him, and willingly bear children for him. He wanted my second sister to treat him as a family member and work hard for him. After all, in his eyes, women are simple-minded, easily blinded by love, and more likely to follow him wholeheartedly. However, he, like my grandmother, does not know that justice will come and retribution will follow. Luke's house in the darkness. Who's next? That morning, my grandmother suddenly found my second sister at the door of her house. Since Mr. Luke took us away and there has been no news, she thought she would never come back. I didn't expect it to be sent back. She was extremely happy to have it back. He called out my dad with one shout. Not only my father shouted, but also several neighbors around him. Their eyes lit up when they saw my second sister. Boys can be born again in the village. It was supposed to be a happy thing, but my grandma was in a dilemma. The money-making gold nugget was back, but I was missing. If no one cuts the flesh, the gold nuggets will be useless. The villagers didn't know, they only knew that the box girl had returned, but for some reason the Zheng family had not opened their business for many days. Ever since my family got 200,000 yuan and became well off, my grandfather and my father became addicted to gambling. The two of them were famous for being rich and stupid, and people often took advantage of them. As a result, they spent all their 200,000 yuan and were left with a lot of debt. It just so happened that they lost again tonight and just signed an IOU. Someone asked my dad, "Your Mia is back, why don't you open the store?" My dad sighed, "I don't know where the third daughter is. There's no meat to attract you." The man rolled his eyes and offered a suggestion. "Isn't your mother also a woman?" My dad was stunned, then waved his hands. "No, my mom is talking about a virgin." The man laughed out loud. "She is afraid that others will steal her business. I have heard that as long as the female blood relative is involved, it will be fine." My father's eyes were shining and he rushed home in a hurry. He didn't know that the man turned around and went to the village chief's house. The next morning, I heard my grandmother screaming. My grandfather was not at home during these few days. My father tied my grandmother to the same pillar where I was tied. He used the same boning knife to cut the flesh off her body. Although I haven't done it for half a year, my technique is still very good. My mother, with her big belly, stood by and took the plate to catch the meat. "You beast. I'm your mother. Mom, you're so old now, you won't live for many more years, you might as well make some contribution to me." Then my grandmother's screams were heard again. There are still quite a few people in the village joining in the fun. On the first day of opening, business was quite good, and we made 4,000 yuan right away. My dad was very happy, and he made an appointment with his poker friends to try his luck again later. So, after cutting enough flesh, he casually took a bottle and poured it on my grandmother's wound. The wound immediately emitted a puff of white smoke, and my grandmother screamed and fainted. "Dad, this is jealous." My dad also realized that it was wrong. He looked at the bottle. It was a liquor bottle. How could it contain vinegar? He was in a hurry to play cards, so he asked my mother to find another bottle of liquor and pour it in to disinfect it. My mother had been oppressed by my grandmother for a long time, and she took the opportunity to torture my grandmother to vent her anger. So my grandma just woke up and she passed out from the pain of drinking a bottle of white wine. My dad played cards all night and lost everything. He originally wanted to come back today to continue cutting his mother's flesh for money, but the police came early in the morning. I don't know who called the police. The police car arrived early in the morning. My dad was very panicked. Later, the village chief came and asked my second sister and my grandmother to hide in the village hall. Because everyone was silent, the police did not find anything and left. When my father asked the village chief to return my second sister and my grandmother, the village chief's face changed. Alexander, continuing the family line is a big deal in the village. It's wrong for your family to use this to make money. If you take the person back this time and the police come again, I won't be responsible. After bargaining, the village chief would keep half and my family would keep the other half. Later, after my grandfather came back, my father took the initiative to give him half of his earnings and he agreed. From then on, my grandma would keep calling every day because the village chief said that whoever was in a hurry should cut the meat by themselves. Many people in the village were anxious to have sons, so after the meat was cut, people were reluctant to even buy them liquor. So my grandma's body started to fester, and you could smell it from a distance. My dad used to bring her 2 meals a day, but now he only does it once every 3 days. Before long, my grandma was so exhausted that she was breathing in more and breathing out less. At this time, most of the women in the village who were going to have sons had already given birth, and no one cared about her life or death. Just when the villagers thought she was dying, something happened in my family. When the village chief arrived, my father and grandfather were already dead. They had been stabbed dozens of times. My grandmother's body was right next to them, already stiff. I don't know who untied my grandma's rope, and she crawled all the way back home. She took the boning knife and cut the necks of both men in their sleep. But when she saw my mother's belly, she stopped and didn't kill her. Maybe she was thinking of her eldest grandson. However, when my mother woke up and saw the tragic situation in the house, she was almost scared crazy. Then her stomach started to hurt. She was about to go into labor. The village midwife rushed over. My mother's belly suddenly became bigger, and something was moving inside. The midwife pressed and rubbed her belly hard, and my mother cried out in pain. My mother cried all day and all night, but her belly became smaller and smaller. Finally, my mother's stomach exploded and a baby covered in purple crawled out of her belly. The midwife screamed in fear and ran away crawling. When the village chief heard the news and rushed over, the baby had disappeared. My second sister's whereabouts are also unknown. It was not found anywhere in the whole village. The midwife died at home the next day. All the blood had been sucked out of his body and there was a row of sharp teeth marks on his neck. Everyone in the village was scared. Some people say it is a ghost baby. At this time, Matthew's wife also started. Matthew's family was afraid that what happened to my family would happen, so they took the child to the town hospital overnight. If it was a ghost baby, they could run away at any time. This time Matthew's wife gave birth very easily. She gave birth just 10 minutes after entering the delivery room. The doctors who delivered the baby were all surprised. It was a white and chubby boy. Matthew was still worried, so he gave the child a full-body checkup. After making sure that there was nothing wrong with the child, he stayed in the hospital for one night and happily took his wife and son home the next day. He told everyone that Alexander's family had done a lot of evil things, so a ghost baby was born. I have a fat son. The villagers were all happy and relieved. But that night, Matthew's family was wiped out. Both of them were disemboweled, their stomachs emptied and stuffed with stones. There were also teeth marks on their necks, and the child was nowhere to be found. The villagers were in a panic. All those who got pregnant through the box girl panicked. They stared at their wives' big bellies with fear on their faces. They were afraid that they would also give birth to ghost babies and be exterminated. So the village chief gathered all the men in the village. Half an hour later, all the pregnant women in the village were driven to the threshing ground. At this time, a lot of dry straw had been piled up in the threshing ground. The village chief ordered several men to go around the edge of the threshing floor and start pouring gasoline. With a shout of fire, flames instantly jumped up in the middle of the haystack, and in the blink of an eye the entire threshing floor became a sea of fire. Suddenly, a loud thunderclap sounded. A large amount of black clouds quickly gathered in the sky. It seemed as if something came out of the fire. That thing actually sucked in the black cloud like a whale. What's going on? Village chief, what should we do? The strange phenomenon appeared in the sky, and the villagers panicked. However, they had no time. The flames suddenly grew to the height of a 3-story building. Then dozens of babies crawled out of the fire. When the police arrived, no one was alive in the threshing floor. After investigating the scene, they found that the dead men had walked into the fire circle on their own. Finally, the authorities issued a notice. The villagers of Lyd Albert village committed a collective self-immolation incident under the influence of a certain cult's lies about letting go of life and death, ascending to heaven and perfection. The local government issued a decree overnight, requiring all villages to carry out political studies and vigorously crack down on cult activities. While watching the news on TV, I contentedly fed my second sister a piece of potato chips. I forgot to mention that in order to keep me, Mr. Luke not only gave me a villa, but also gave me one of his supplementary cards. But I didn't want the card. I asked him to exchange it for cash. After all, when he died, his card would be useless. Of course, I didn't miss the look of disdain that flashed across his eyes. But do I care? I can only feel pity for him in my heart. Poor thing, you can only count your days and I will help you spend your money well. In hell, remember to reform yourself. My second sister and I won't have to worry about the rest of our lives. However, I will not be grateful to him. This is my reward for punishing evil and promoting good. My second sister became paralyzed and unable to move after taking the medicine my grandmother got from the expert. After this period of time, we have sought medical treatment everywhere and she has recovered a lot and can now walk. However, she still has some special abilities. Where do you want to go, sis? Oh, you said the master the old woman was looking for was in Lawn Mountain? I smiled and said, okay, let's go.